There are moments in a soldier's life when the ordinary path isn't enough. For some, service is tradition. For others, it's duty. But for a select few, it's the pursuit of something greater. Something that demands everything they have, and everything they are. In families across America, the uniform is more than fabric and patches. It's legacy. It's identity. Private First Class Barr came from such a family, generations who wore the flag on their shoulders with pride. But none had ever crossed into the world of special operations. He wanted to be the first. Not to outshine those before him, but to set a new standard. To prove that within his bloodline, the will to go further still lived. That drive would lead him to one of the toughest selections in the U.S. Army, the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, RASP. RASP is not a course you simply attend. It's a crucible. A relentless system built to strip away comfort, weakness, and excuses, until what remains is a soldier worthy of the 75th Ranger Regiment. The regiment itself is a name spoken with respect. Fast, disciplined, lethal. An elite light infantry force trained to deploy anywhere in the world within hours. From Afghanistan to Africa, from airfields to city streets, Rangers are always ready. Again and again. The road began long before the first day of assessment. Weeks of preparation, conditioning, and mental focus led him to the gates of the 75th Ranger Regiment's training grounds. When he arrived, he wasn't alone. Dozens of young soldiers stood beside him, each with the same determination burning behind their eyes. The cadre, the instructors, said little. They didn't need to. Their presence alone carried authority, forged through years of service and combat experience. They had been where these men wanted to go. The first briefing was short, cold, and clear. You are here to earn your place. Nobody owes you anything. From this moment, everything you do is assessed. Every word. Every movement. Every breath. We are not looking for perfect soldiers. We are looking for relentless ones. Silence followed. And then the work began. The first few days were administrative, paperwork, medical checks, equipment inspections. But beneath the routine, every candidate could feel the pressure building. They knew what came next: physical testing, ruck marches, land navigation, and the long grind that would define their endurance. At night, the barracks were quiet. No one spoke much. Each man was alone with his thoughts, wondering if he had what it took, if the dream that had brought him here would be strong enough to carry him through. Barr wrote a short note to himself and folded it into his pocket. 3 words: earn your place. That was all the reminder he needed. In the morning, the cadre gathered the candidates on the gravel field. The air was cold, sharp, and heavy with anticipation. Boots lined up, hands at the ready, hearts pounding. The first physical assessment began. Push-ups. Sit-ups. A 5-mile run. Pull-ups. Every number mattered, but attitude mattered more. RASP isn't just about how strong you are. It's about how you respond when you have nothing left to give. By the end of the day, some were already gone, unable to meet the standard. Others barely passed but refused to quit. Those were the ones the cadre watched closely. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Barr's arms burned, his legs shook, but his mind was steady. He wasn't just thinking about surviving today. He was thinking about the men who had come before, Rangers who had fought and died under the same flag. And he promised himself, I'll earn this. Every inch of it. That was only the beginning. RASP doesn't just measure strength, it measures resolve. It measures resolve. It exposes fear, hesitation, and ego, and forces you to confront them head-on. The instructor's job isn't to destroy you, it's to reveal you. To see if, when stripped of everything comfortable, you still stand tall. Barr learned quickly that there are no shortcuts, no sympathy, and no second chances. In the regiment, failure isn't an ending, it's a lesson. And the only way forward is through pain, repetition, and consistency. As one cadre told the class that night, his voice carrying through the hallway. Ranger standards don't care how you feel. They care what you do. Those words echoed long after the lights went out. Tomorrow, the real trials would begin, and the path to the regiment would start to claim its first true believers. At dawn, the candidates rose to the sound of boots on concrete and the sharp call of the cadre. No alarms. No warnings. Just movement. Discipline began before the first word was spoken. RASP doesn't ask for your best, it demands it. Every hour. Every repetition. Every breath. The second phase of training separated those who wanted to be rangers from those who were meant to be rangers. The first major evolution was the ruck march, a brutal test of endurance and mindset. 50 pounds of gear, a weapon, and miles of uneven terrain ahead. No music. No talking. Just the sound of straps creaking, boots striking dirt, and lungs fighting for air. Each candidate had to learn the balance between pace and patience. Those who rushed burned out. Those who hesitated fell behind. And in the regiment, falling behind is never acceptable. Private Barr remembered the words of a cadre. Pain is the price of admission. Don't pay it once, pay it daily. As the miles passed, the weight on his shoulders began to feel heavier. But so did the pride that came with refusing to slow down. RASP doesn't reward speed. It rewards consistency. And in consistency, a ranger earns his edge. When the march ended, the silence that followed was almost louder than the footsteps that had filled the morning air. Men dropped to the ground, catching their breath. But Barr stood, eyes forward. He'd made it, not as the strongest or the fastest, but as one who never stopped. The next day brought land navigation. No GPS, no shortcuts. Just a map, a compass, and a soldier's sense of direction. In RASP, it isn't just about knowing where you're going, it's about trusting yourself to find the way, even when the path disappears. The Georgia pines stretched endlessly. The forest was quiet except for the distant rustle of leaves and the heartbeat of men racing the clock. Each candidate plotted points, calculated distances, and moved alone. The test was not only of skill, but of focus. Losing your way here didn't just mean failing the course, it meant losing trust in your own judgment. Barr learned to slow his breathing, to think before every step, to read the terrain as if it were alive. Hours passed. Sweat soaked through his uniform. Finally, he found his final point, a small marker tied to a post deep in the trees. He smiled faintly. Not because it was easy, but because it proved something simple: discipline beats doubt. Back at camp, the cadre reviewed every candidate's progress. They weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for the ones who refused to make excuses. One cadre stood before the exhausted men and said, "You want to be a ranger? Then stop waiting for someone to push you. The regiment doesn't chase. It leads." That night, Barr thought about those words. The regiment leads, not just in combat, but in character. A ranger doesn't need applause or validation. He moves with quiet purpose, ready to do what others won't. Days bled into nights. Sleep became a rare currency, traded for effort and willpower. Each new task built upon the last, physical exhaustion layered with mental pressure, small mistakes amplified under watchful eyes. Then came the team events. If the early weeks tested individuals, this phase tested the group. Because in the regiment, no ranger fights alone. The candidates were divided into teams and given tasks that demanded coordination under stress, carrying heavy logs, moving wounded comrades across long distances, assembling and disassembling equipment under time constraints. It wasn't about strength anymore. It was about communication, leadership, and humility. When fatigue set in, tempers rose. Men shouted. Some grew quiet. But only those who learned to listen and adapt succeeded. Barr began to notice something change within himself. He wasn't just focused on his own success anymore, he was watching out for the men next to him. If someone fell behind, he picked up the slack. If someone doubted themselves, he spoke up. The cadre noticed. Because true leadership isn't declared, it's demonstrated. A ranger isn't measured by his rank, but by how far he'll go for his brothers. That realization hit Barr one evening during a long movement drill. The team was carrying a 200-pound dummy across the training field, simulating a casualty evacuation. Everyone was exhausted. But when one man's grip failed, Barr took more of the weight. He didn't think. He just moved. Because that's what rangers do. When the exercise ended, the cadre walked by quietly, offering no praise, just a nod. And in that nod was respect. In RASP, silence is louder than words. By the end of the week, the candidates were sharper, leaner, and more mentally alert. They had learned to find rhythm in discomfort, to treat chaos as just another form of order. But the cadre knew this was only the foundation. Everything so far had been preparation. The true test was still ahead, the part of RASP that breaks many and builds the few who remain. Before lights out, a senior instructor addressed the formation. His voice was calm but carried weight. Up to now, you've been tested. Tomorrow, you'll be defined. Phase 3 begins at sunrise. You will find out who you really are. No one spoke. No one moved. They just stared ahead, knowing that whatever came next would push them further than they had ever gone before. And as Barr lay on his bunk, eyes open in the dark, he whispered the same 3 words that had carried him since the beginning. Earn your place. The next phase would prove if he truly could. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the candidates were already moving. Phase 3, the heart of RASP, had begun. This was where exhaustion met expectation, where limits collapsed, and where only willpower remained standing. For weeks they had trained to prepare their bodies. Now, the cadre would test their minds. The early morning air was thick with fog, the ground slick from the night's rain. Each candidate stood at attention, rucksacks lined up beside them, uniforms already damp. The cadre paced the formation, eyes sharp, silent. Then came the command, move out. No explanation. No briefing. Just movement. That was how it went for days. Long ruck marches through forests and fields, timed runs with unpredictable obstacles, physical drills that blurred the line between exhaustion and awareness. The purpose wasn't to confuse the candidates, it was to remove predictability. In the field, rangers don't know what's coming next. Neither did they. Hours became days. Days felt like weeks. Sleep became a rumor. When the human body reaches its limit, the mind becomes the battleground. And that's what Phase 3 was designed for, to strip away everything except the truth of who each soldier really was. Barr had felt tired before, but this was different. It wasn't just fatigue, it was a test of will. Every muscle burned, every breath came short, and still the cadre pushed harder. They ran drills under freezing rain, crawled through mud with rifles raised, and carried heavy equipment across endless miles of terrain. Each movement had purpose. Every detail mattered. Because attention to detail is what separates a ranger from a soldier. At one point, a candidate stumbled during a team carry. The cadre shouted, "You dropped your brother." Barr reacted instantly, he grabbed the man's arm and helped him up without thinking. Later that night, when the exercise ended, Barr realized the lesson. It wasn't about the fall. It was about how fast you stand back up, and how you never let someone fall alone. During these weeks, the candidates were also introduced to SOCP, the Special Operations Combatives Program. Hand-to-hand combat training that combined control, precision, and aggression. For many, it was their first exposure to close combat, the kind that demands calm under chaos. The instructors moved with surgical precision, demonstrating techniques that looked effortless but carried devastating power. Barr remembered one of the cadre saying, "Anybody can throw a punch. Rangers fight to win, not to rage." Those words stayed with him. SOCP wasn't about brute strength, it was about control, discipline, and awareness. A ranger must be as composed in hand-to-hand combat as he is behind a rifle. That balance was critical, because the next part of the course was about to test both, physically and mentally. Ranger first responder training began. This wasn't classroom theory. It was battlefield reality. Under simulated fire, the candidates learned how to treat wounds, stop bleeding, stabilize a casualty, and evacuate under pressure. Smoke filled the air, gunfire echoed in the distance, and every movement had to be fast, deliberate, and correct. Barr knelt over a training dummy, applying a tourniquet with trembling hands as an instructor barked orders over his shoulder. Speed is fine, but accuracy is final. It wasn't just about memorizing steps. It was about keeping calm when every instinct screamed to panic. In combat, chaos is constant. And RASP was teaching them how to think in that chaos, how to perform when seconds meant lives. By the time the exercise ended, the field looked like a war zone, exhausted men kneeling beside casualties, sweat mixing with rain and mud. But within that exhaustion was something new, confidence. They were beginning to move like rangers. The following week brought the culmination event, the ultimate test before Phase 4. For many, it was the hardest week of their lives. The cadre gave no details. They only said, "Pack your rucks. You'll know when it's over." It began with long movements, navigation at night, and mission simulations that blurred the line between training and reality. They carried equipment, rescued casualties, conducted reconnaissance under stress, and executed missions as if deployed for real. The weather was unforgiving, rain one day, blistering sun the next. Sleep came in fragments, meals in seconds. Every mistake cost time, every second mattered. Barr's shoulders bled from the ruck straps. His boots were soaked, his voice hoarse, but his focus didn't fade. Pain wasn't the enemy, it was proof that he was still in the fight. There were moments when he thought he'd reached his limit, when his body begged to stop. But each time, he remembered why he started. Not to survive. To become. As one cadre said during a short rest period. You don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of training. So train higher. That mindset kept Barr moving through the final night, a grueling endurance test under the stars. The moon cast pale light across the field as the men carried logs, dragged sandbags, and climbed obstacles until dawn. At sunrise, the cadre called the group to formation. Mud caked their uniforms, faces streaked with sweat and dirt. Nobody looked sharp, but they all stood tall. The instructor's voice broke the silence. If you're still standing, you've already proven something. But RASP isn't over. One more phase remains. The regiment doesn't give anything. It verifies. Then he paused. Get some rest. You've earned a few hours. Tomorrow, we test your mind. As the formation broke, Barr felt the weight of every mile, every push-up, every sleepless night. But beneath that exhaustion was pride, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that stands quietly, knowing it's been earned. That night, for the first time in weeks, the candidates slept deeply. Because in the morning, they would wake to face the final proving ground, the phase that would decide who would wear the tan beret, and who would go home. Dawn came quietly. No yelling, no explosions of sound. Just the low hum of the base waking up, a different kind of tension in the air. The candidates had made it this far, and that alone meant something. But it didn't mean they were rangers yet. Phase 4 wasn't about muscle or endurance. It was about heart, about judgment, leadership, and the unseen discipline that defines the 75th Ranger Regiment. When the cadre assembled the formation, there were fewer men now. Some faces were gone, reassigned, recycled, or released. Those who remained stood taller, leaner, sharper. "Welcome to the final phase," the lead instructor said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "This is where we find out if you can think like a ranger. Not just fight like one." The days ahead focused on mental performance under stress, leadership evaluations, mission planning, and critical decision-making. In one exercise, each candidate was given a simulated mission, plan, brief, and execute an objective under time constraints. The cadre observed everything, from how they handled uncertainty to how they treated their teammates under pressure. Barr's group was tasked with planning a reconnaissance mission. The objective: gather intelligence and extract without detection. Simple on paper. Complicated in practice. They had to analyze terrain maps, plan movement routes, assign roles, calculate risk, and adapt to unexpected changes mid-operation. Barr found himself stepping up naturally. Not barking orders, just leading through calm direction. "Let's focus on what we control," he said. "Everything else, we'll handle as it comes." Hours later, during the after-action review, the cadre said little. But one instructor nodded. "Rangers don't need loud leaders," he said. "They need dependable ones." That line stayed with Barr. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about ego. It was about service, the quiet, relentless responsibility to be reliable when others falter. Another key component of Phase 4 was cultural immersion into what it meant to be part of the regiment. The cadre gathered them in a dimly lit classroom. On the walls hung photographs, operations, fallen rangers, moments that captured sacrifice and pride. A senior NCO walked in, wearing the tan beret and scroll on his sleeve. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked around the room. Then he said, That scroll on your arm, it's not decoration. It's a contract. Between you and every man who came before you, and every man who'll stand beside you when things go wrong. He told them stories, not about glory or medals, but about moments of quiet courage. A ranger who shielded his buddy during an ambush. A team that refused to leave a fallen man behind, even under fire. Acts of brotherhood that went unseen but never forgotten. This regiment isn't built on strength, the NCO said. It's built on trust. You don't earn that in a week. You build it every single day. The room was silent. For the first time, Barr felt the full weight of what he was chasing. Not the title, the responsibility. The next days continued with mission profiles, where candidates applied everything they'd learned. Small unit tactics, communications, leadership, and discipline all merged into final, complex exercises. Each mission ran like a deployment simulation, long nights, rotating leadership roles, decision points that mirrored real-world operations. The cadre intentionally created friction, sudden radio loss, missing intelligence, unexpected casualties. It wasn't about success or failure. It was about composure, about proving that under confusion, a ranger still performs. By the third mission, fatigue had returned. But something had changed. The candidates didn't just survive, they operated with purpose. Movements became synchronized. Commands flowed naturally. Trust, once forced, was now instinct. Barr noticed how quickly they adapted, how they communicated with nods, gestures, single words. They had become a team. Then came the rite of passage, the final evaluation. They weren't told when it began. It just started. The cadre woke them in the middle of the night and told them to move out with full gear. No explanation. No time to prepare. They navigated through darkness, carried heavy loads, and completed timed objectives. Each station tested a different skill: weapons handling, endurance, mental clarity, teamwork. It wasn't the physical pain that defined the test, it was the uncertainty. They didn't know how long it would last. For some, that unknown broke them. For others, it fueled them. Barr kept one thought in his mind: don't quit. Not here. Not now. Hours turned to days. The world became a blur of commands, sweat, and determination. And then, one morning, as the sun rose over the training grounds, the cadre called them to formation one last time. The instructor stood in front of them, holding a small box. Inside, the tan berets. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the instructor said quietly, "If you're here, you've earned this. Not because you were the fastest or the strongest, but because you refused to stop. That's the ranger way." One by one, they stepped forward. When Barr received his beret, he didn't smile. He just looked down at it, feeling the weight, not of fabric, but of meaning. He thought of every step that led here. The sleepless nights. The moments of doubt. The teammates who didn't make it. And the brotherhood that carried him through. He placed the beret on his head. The cadre called, "Rangers, take a knee." Every man dropped together. The instructor said the words they had all waited to hear. "Rangers lead the way." And in one voice, they responded, tired, proud, and forever changed. All the way. That night, Barr stood alone outside the barracks, watching the stars. For the first time in months, there was silence, not from exhaustion, but from peace. He had entered RASP as a soldier. He was leaving as something more. Because the Ranger Creed wasn't just a promise to the regiment, it was a way of life. Recognizing that I volunteered as a ranger, fully knowing the hazards of my chosen profession. I will always endeavor to uphold the prestige, honor, and high esprit de corps of the Rangers. He whispered those words to himself, softly. They weren't just lines anymore. They were his truth. When the sun rose, the regiment awaited. And Barr, now a ranger, was ready.